After such an introduction, it just increases the pressure on the speaker. A very warm welcome to all of you. Independent of the praise that has been given to Tata Motors, and it's good to hear that we're obviously one of the largest, one of the most desired car manufacturer in the world. I just quote, I'm not quite sure if this can be statistically confirmed by any kind of evidence and market research. It's a great pleasure being here, although I must admit, or I assume, that it has actually created some confusion when you saw my name and the title of the speech on this summit's agenda. And you have asked yourself, a German by birth, but I left Germany some 20 years ago. Ever since then, for professional reasons, I've been traveling around the world for different assignments in different regions, in different functions for different companies. It speaks on behalf of Tata Motors and the automotive industry in India as an opening speaker, a keynote speaker at the Smart Mobility Summit in Israel, in Tel Aviv. Sounds a bit strange, isn't it? And I do hope the ones who have drawn the conclusion that's possibly for good reasons will find enough justification during the coming 20 minutes that I can at least travel back to India to say I have actually worked hard in terms of marketing of India and Tata Motors for the expenses of my flight ticket. Having said that, the title of the speech is Mobility Revolution in India, ? And I'm going to give you some insight on the question mark. The second part is possibly the most important one, talking about inclusive, sustainable, and transformational. Because this is what it needs to be in order to get rid of the question mark. So more or less the entire speech, from the beginning, the question mark to the summary, it's all covered in the title of the speech as such. I tried to prove that there is no question mark and that India is about to leapfrog mobility and is about to actually commit a revolution on the way forward. For the ones who are not that familiar with the Indian market, and honestly speaking, except the few fellow Indians sitting in the first two rows, I don't bring them with me in order to at least have somebody to grant me some applause, which is nevertheless appreciated. Oh, I haven't expected that there are that many Indians. That's impressive. that's good. It's good to see. I would like to briefly introduce the Indian economy as a place extremely well positioned to become the largest automotive hub in the near future, or to become the number 3 in the global automotive space. Just a few pieces of statistic. You don't have to recall it. Some of you might know it anyway. But as far as the economy is concerned, India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. GDP growth as we speak around 7.4%. And we have a continuous rise as far as the GDP, the per capita and the per capita income is concerned. The automotive industry, we contribute 7.1% to the GDP. So like in lots of other automotive driven economies, we are also an engine for the automotive economy. Even more important is the piece of statistic that we actually stand for 49% of the manufacturing GDP. And we employ some roughly 29, I didn't count them, that's also according to the book of statistics of the Indian government, some 29 million people in our industry directly and indirectly. The most encouraging point is the last statement. A huge latent demand with currently just 21 cars per 1,000 people, but at the same point of time having possibly one of the youngest populations of any state in the world, where 50% are below 25 and 60% of the population is below 35. And this entire young generation is extremely technology related, which is an important element to be mentioned in the context of the question mark to be answered as far as the revolution of the mobility space is concerned. Competition, that's a little bit the downside. Being in India is possibly the toughest, the stiffest one in the world, or as recently a colleague said, if you get India right, you are fit for the rest of the world. So it's almost the survival of the fittest in this context, because in the passenger vehicle space, 18 players, but 2 players actually claim 67% of the total market, so there's not that much left for the remaining 16 players. This is a very competitive environment, and we do not necessarily have in the Indian market a global level playing field, because local players, Indian players by birth, so to say, like Tata Motors or a colleague sitting in front of me, a force, we have to do a lot of basic developments our own, because we don't have a shelf sitting somewhere in Japan or in Europe where we can just open it and we draw the solutions which are readily available, applied somewhere in the rest of the world. We need to do it in an indigenous way to make sure that we do not only hit the requirements as far as the regulatory demand is concerned, we also need to make sure that we make it a cost-conscious solution which makes mobility affordable in the Indian market environment. But even India, although it's such a spoiled, highly competitive market environment, creates, because of its growth potential, enough attraction to lots of other players. So that means disruption, not only by technology, is anyway a case in our industry, but also in particular for new market entrants is also a common theme for which we need to be prepared in India. Let's actually look into the growth story and the role the government plays. And there are 4 key issues to be addressed, to be highlighted. The one is Make in India, a very strong focus on innovation, facilitation of investment, a strong focus and enhancement of the skill development, and build best-in-class manufacturing, and very strong foreign-directed investment support given by the government. It's not that the government is doing it on our behalf, but the last couple of years we have seen a very strong emphasis on support provided by the government in order to enable the industry to work on all of these dimensions more intensively, in order to make India more attractive, but also to bring at the same point of time with the skills, with the comparison to the global competitiveness, efficiency and productivity into the industrial landscape. FAME incentives, FAME, faster adaptation manufacturing of electric vehicles in India. That's what FAME is the appreciation for. So already since a couple of years, strong focus of the government to actually support fast adaptation. Engineering in the first instance, manufacturing in the second instance, in combination with Make in India, to really develop homegrown technologies, homegrown IPs, indigenized solutions, in order to bring new technologies, as I have mentioned earlier, in a cost-conscious way into India, to enable India to apply these technologies for the better of India, and I'm going to come to it, but at the same point of time, to actually build technologies and to make India more than just a cheap labor manufacturing hub, to actually build a rock-solid engineering base, not only in software, as we have it already, but also in mechanical and production and industrial engineering, because this is the added value of an economy and of an industry as it is automotive, and not just leveraging the labor cost advantage of the blue-collar labor, because this is not going to be sustainable and this is not going to contribute sufficiently well enough to the economical growth of India, which is needed in order to deal with the increasing population and the higher expectations of the younger generation as far as the conditions of living, their standard of living in India is concerned. Smart cities. Smart cities have almost become one of the key challenges for mobility, because, and you can't disconnect it, in particular not in a country as it is India, where you see more and more concentration of people living in the larger cities, while at the same point of time you experience the problem of pollution. I'm going to come to it. And increasing traffic jams, because the infrastructure, although lots of investment goes into the infrastructure, can't develop and grow fast enough as the demand for individual mobility in public transport actually requires it. So therefore, smart city, to rethink the development of the cities from something that develops without a plan to something that's strategically planned and takes all elements of a smart city into consideration, where mobility is one of the key issues, because it determines also the infrastructure in a smart city, is key critical and gives us huge leverage, because in all of these smart cities, as of the first pencil draw on a draft, mobility is part of it. And now I talk on behalf of Tata as a group. We have lots of group companies next to Tata Motors which have a clear interest in the smart cities because of the scope of activities, their scope of business. And 100 cities which are expected to become smart cities in India will possibly also help to faster adapt to the new technologies and to make sure that we get an infrastructure which is future ready for smart mobility solutions, as it is the theme of this summit. And then we have the Automotive Mission. Automotive Mission, 10 to 15% growth in 5 years. By 2026, we actually expect to be much earlier, number 3 in the global statistics. So some, and let's keep fingers crossed, I'm not quite sure if it's worth to cross the fingers, because the infrastructure might not facilitate it or might finally collapse. But it's very likely that we become the 3rd largest market much faster than 2025 or 2026. But you can seriously expect that in 2026 we are going to be close to 10 million of vehicles, close to 300 billion in annual revenue. And as opposed to the current 29 million jobs employed by the industry, to possibly get as high as 65 million additional jobs, which would be a huge contribution to the overall GDP per capita income development in India. The only point is we need to make sure that this is also going to be sustainable. And talking about sustainability, we need to talk about the fundamental challenges. And these are actually 4. You could also reduce it to 2, but I think for completion reasons, we have to mention the 4 to draft a more balanced picture. The first one is safety. Every 4 minutes, there's a traffic-related fatality in the Indian road traffic. May it be a pedestrian, a biker, a motorcyclist, or a 4-wheeler or a truck. This is not a statistic you would like to see for the future, because as the traffic is going to increase, the 4 minutes might possibly become shorter, and the number of facilities will possibly get higher as a consequence. We say we have an obligation as an industry in order to enhance the products as far as active and passive safety is concerned, but there is also a task to be given to the government to reinforce the law. And we have a joint responsibility to improve on the behavioral issues, on the discipline issues, because to a large extent it's about awareness, that people acknowledge there are regulations, and the regulations are not there to be broken, the regulations are there to be adhered to in order to make traffic more safe. And as traffic becomes safe, traffic has the opportunity to become sustainable. Traffic congestions, I'm not quite sure what the statistic is for Tel Aviv. But even yesterday late evening there was a traffic congestion, to my surprise. But in India that's almost the norm in the urban cities, and according to the latest statistics, the average speed across India is in the vicinity of 20 kilometers per hour. That's not a lot. So that's more a stop and go than a flowing traffic. And this is something we need to look into it in order to make sure that we leverage the existing infrastructure more effectively in order to actually provide mobility opportunities for the future, and in order to support the growth potential I have just mentioned. Environment. Environment is possibly the largest concern as far as future individual mobility is concerned, because there's no doubt automotive contributes to the pollution, and statistics vary, but something around 15% of the pollution is a contribution that actually comes from the automotive industry, and we cannot run away from our obligation to deal with this 15% and to lower it as far as our carbon impact, carbon footprint is concerned. But for India, we have a very specific situation, because 14 out of the 15 most polluted cities in the world are unfortunately in India. So that means the level of awareness that something needs to be done and that growth is largely going to be determined by sustainability in terms of environmental friendliness has in the meanwhile been understood and has turned into one of the largest challenges we are currently facing. The regulatory framework is pushing quite hard. It's not that long ago, 2 years, that in diesel displacements, larger 2 liters got banned from Delhi. In a later stage, the ban got lifted and a special tax as a penalty got introduced. Is a tax penalty for the ones who can afford a vehicle with a displacement of larger than 2 liters, a game changer or behavior changer? Most probably not, but nevertheless, there was quite a discussion about the future of diesel, and we have seen across the range of products a significant drop in diesel applications in favor of petrol, but in favor of petrol means also in favor of a higher CO2 emission, because this is where we have the conflict between the two conventional internal combustion propulsion systems. In 2020, we are going to close the gap in a fast race, so to say, because we went from BS3 to BS4 on the 1st of April 2017. Government decided in agreement with the industry to skip Euro 5. So BS is comparable with Euro in simple terms, to skip Euro 5 and to go straight for Euro 6. And Euro 6 is now going to be introduced effective as of the 1st of April 2020. The single largest investment for us as a company we have ever spent in the existence of Tata Motors. This is the challenge. Some more than 200 powertrain applications, but powertrain doesn't make the difference. It's the powertrain in the vehicle application, that everything needs to effectively be ready back to back as of the 1st of April 2020, because we cannot even sell after the 1st of April 2020 any of the BS4 vehicles anymore, according to the latest change in the regulations, respectively by a decision of the Indian Supreme Court. A huge challenge for all of us, unprecedented. No other country in the world has ever gone through a similar kind of cycle in terms of short period, push pressure on your R&D capability, and then with a sharp deadline, which is almost a question of life or death. Because if you meet it, if you miss this target, you are out of products and you're out of business. That's what it effectively means. But the government has at least clearly declared what it wants, and it's up to us to live according to it. Infrastructure, I have mentioned this. Even if the infrastructure grows with the current speed, and expecting that we are going to be the second largest road network, but unfortunately still with low quality, it's something that really encourages the automotive industry to believe in its growth plan opportunity. And this is now something that might surprise you, because normally in our industry you are used to 4 letters, A, C, E, S. And we have changed it. I have changed it. Because autonomous, from my point of view, although we have recently successfully tested autonomous driving level 5 in the UK with one of our products, is for India, under the given infrastructure and traffic and road conditions, possibly some other couple of years down the road. But we do believe in the necessity in terms of sustainability to actually put focus on safe. So that we have changed it from ACES, autonomous, connected, electric and shared, to SES, connected, electric, shared and safe. Because safe is the absolute prerequisite for the reasons I have mentioned earlier. And this actually closes the loop to this summit here in Tel Aviv, because connected I have seen, just walking the exhibition outside of the conference center, there is a good number of startups which say we stand for connectivity, either directly or with the reference to cybersecurity, because the two you can hardly separate as far as safe driving, connected and safe driving in the future is concerned. So we need to go for advanced electronics. It's about providing comfort and convenience, or as I have just learned in a pre-meeting, as a vehicle was in the past all about steel, in the future it's from an added value structure point of view more about electronics, which might give, by the way, Israel the opportunity to dominate the automotive industry if it is no longer about steel and a very asset-rich setting of factories where you put all the steel panels together and you put the seats and the cockpits in it. At the end of the day, the electronics is going to make the vehicle drive, and not necessarily the question how the steel panels got welded or sealed these days. Second one, electric. Electrification is the key word. The government has submitted the vision saying by 2030 we are going to be all electric, at least in the public transport sector, at least as far as the commercial fleets are concerned. And there was a huge debate, standard question at each and every interview, do you believe in it? It's not that much about believing in it. It's more a question, would we like to make it happen? And I think we as an industry have very strongly committed ourselves to make it happen, knowing that this is not an easy ride, knowing that this goes against all currently available statistics, where for India, if you look into the statistics, people say in 2025, electric is possibly an adaptation in the vicinity of 3 to 5%. If it would just be on 3 to 5% in 2025, forget the dream of being full electric by 2030. But if you would actually think a little bit more aggressively and you take the fleet CO2 carbon footprint requirements as of 2022 and you go for a critical review, what would be required in order to make electric powertrain solutions attractive to the customers by building an ecosystem that goes beyond the question of providing a car, that deals with all of the kind of hurdle rates of a customer today, committing to an early and fast adaptation to electrification, you all of a sudden realize playing this game more aggressively, more intensively, and possibly smart mobility summit, there are possibly opportunities far beyond what we can imagine as we speak. You just need to let your thought processes go, and you need to rethink your business in a larger context, in the context of an ecosystem. The other one is shared, ride-sharing, freight aggregation, bus, rapid transport systems, etc. Also something where we actually make, we are a shared community. And if mobility can only be protected by making it shared, so that you don't have the hassle of owning, of maintaining, of insuring, or of driving and parking, it's in India certainly an option. Also because of the fact that the young generation in India behaves a little bit like us old businessmen, where we all say these days we need to be asset light. So the next generation obviously has learned about the concept of an asset light life much faster than some of the businesses and the business leaders. But this is going to give opportunities where we also need to ask ourselves, would we like to become a commodity provider, so vehicle as a commodity and somebody else does the shared services? Or are we going to be the shared service player tomorrow as a new source of income and also profits? And the last one, I have mentioned it, self-explanatory, it's about safe. So the Tatas became what the Tatas are today because the Tatas have always been focused of what are India's problems. That's the way we got into power plants, the way we got into textile, the way we got into automotive, starting with the truck business. And it's possibly also the recipe for the future that we ask ourselves, what is the most imminent problem at this point of time? It's pollution. It's about sustainability of mobility. And then let's actually go all out in order to make it happen. But it needs to be in the first instance a safe approach, because the current statistic is not what we would like to encourage. Because to control the growth of your population, you should not put the responsibility to the automotive industry. That's something that needs to be controlled differently. Gets me to the question how to approach it. And this is part of a recently given presentation at a similar kind of summit with the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, as the sponsor, so to say, where I said, oops, I didn't do anything. I need some help. And I don't like to touch this computer because I'm part of the Apple generation. It's, as a CEO, you are used to lots of things that go on behind your back, but you are not used to the concept that something happens without you. So it's interesting, a new lesson learned. Now, where we said, look, if we do not just talk about products, which is the core domain of our business, and we actually take the scope of sustainable mobility, smart mobility to the level of an ecosystem, then it's not going to be good enough anymore that we actually live in our cocon as the automotive industry and that we actually try to find our own way through the struggle, through the challenges into the future. Then we really need to apply an approach where we say it needs to be in the first instance inclusive. We need to put very strong focus on sustainability, and it needs to be transformational, which puts a bit of a question mark back to the revolution of mobility, because this already gives the answer. I do not believe that a mobility change in India or generally across the world can be done in a revolutionary approach. It needs to be transformational. What does it mean? Inclusive, all ecosystem partners need to be aligned. So that means it's not just good enough that we run around like crazy, that we align with the suppliers, that we get into the shared service base. It starts with the government. It goes through the OEMs, straight to the suppliers, the customers, the drivers, the community. Because this is where we actually need to plant the idea. That's where we need to build the awareness that the future requires a substantive change. We need to create joint platforms for policy making. And the government is quite open. Recently announced at a similar kind of summit in Delhi, in public-private partnerships in order to join forces and to give a level of confidence to the industry that the government is on board and that the government is effectively supporting the larger developments as far as such kind of mega trends are concerned. Sustainability. Sustainability is a larger play and responsibility on our side. Better fuel economy, lightweighting in the same context, almost a prerequisite for the efficiency of electric vehicles. Or also improving the efficiency in the value chain. We are the largest commercial vehicle manufacturer in India, but nevertheless we are promoting very strongly, even by a recent investment in a startup, the improvement of efficiency in logistics, because the current cost level of logistics in India will possibly become at one point of time one of the limiting cost factors as far as the Indian economy's competitiveness is concerned. And only an efficient logistic chain is also a logistic chain that can effectively support the growth. And the growth is going to drive our business, not the inefficiency of the logistics setup as it is currently the case. And we need to be open for alternative fuels, CNG, methanol, ethanol, but the focus needs to be on electrification, because electrification requires a larger intervention than just replacing a powertrain from an internal combustion engine to electric powertrain solution. We actually need an intervention where we build an ecosystem so that electric vehicles can effectively deal with all of the concerns of the customers. And you know, the key concern these days is range anxiety. So paramount is the setup of a charging infrastructure, developing new technologies, faster charging, etc., and finding answers to the question, what is the residual value of an electric vehicle in a couple of years, while we all expect that the battery pricing are significantly going to drop in the years to come. And transformational, it's not going to happen overnight. So that means we need to craft, and that's one of the demands towards the government, we need to draft a transformational plan, which gives us some level of security in the early stage, so that we know where to assign and how to assign our resources, may it be in headcount, but in particular in financials, because playing on all the battlefields is effectively impossible, because we are in an extremely low margin market environment. And if we are supposed to actually do everything at the same point of time, at the end of the day, we will possibly end up with nothing. So that means we need to sit with the government to draft the timeline, the content of the timeline, and then to make up our mind, which is still in our responsibility, to apply which technology for what kind of application in order to make sure that we move forward, while at the same point of time we don't miss the target to be at the end of the day to the largest extent electrified. We need to crash the timelines. That's a huge demand. That requires commonality, leveraging common architectures, de-risking the launch of new programs, life cycle management over a couple of years in order to reduce the basic investments in an asset-rich industry as it is automotive. And as far as the overall play is concerned, we need to become much more digital. We need to learn to play with the big data in order to focus on the right areas and to drive and to leverage our potential investments. And I usually say, look, if you don't have deep pockets, that's okay. But in an environment like India, you have the problem that your pockets are usually empty. There's nothing in it, so you have to make a lot out of nothing. But so far we are doing, in global comparison, not that bad, I would say. So poverty sometimes creates innovation. And if you can translate these innovations into business enhancers, you can also profitably grow with these kind of opportunities. And I mentioned it earlier with the reference to shared new business models as a new revenue pool, profitability pool is absolutely a key critical. And why are we here? The question was asked somewhat earlier. We have a vision at Tata Motors. We innovate mobility solutions with passion to enhance quality of life. In particular, the humility element to enhance quality of life with a reference to our communities, with the reference to the people in India in terms of sustainability, in terms of safety, in terms of pollution, in terms of emission, is something deeply embedded in the DNA of this great group. And by everything we have seen so far, what we have experienced on the basis of the initial contacts into Israel, to the University of Tel Aviv, to a good number of startups, with the support we have seen coming from the government, we actually here to look out for partnerships to lead the future of mobility. And the summit says it all: smart mobility solutions, smart points towards the future. We believe Israel has a couple of USPs: a mobility, a hotspot for mobility disruption, innovative technologies. I think what we have seen earlier this morning, far beyond the scope of my technical understanding, I must admit, great opportunities to learn and to collaborate in the smart mobility movement along certain technology developments, partly dual use coming from different sectors of the industry. And I think it's a good match, also from a cultural point of view, with the need of the hour of the Indian automotive industry. And that's the reason why we are here. That's the reason why I have happily accepted the invitation to deliver this, I think in the meanwhile, 25-minute speech. Sorry for exceeding the limits by 5 minutes. If I get invited once more, I will actually try to save the 5 minutes in order to be balance neutral. Great pleasure being here. I look forward to some more interactions, also leveraging this event for networking. Having said that, thanks a lot and have an interesting summit. Thank you.